like I've always written as far back as I can remember. The one creative thing that I would do is telling stories in some way, and eventually that just turned into writing them down. And I've been doing it since 4th grade is when I can remember specifically.
I started to, get school projects that were like, okay, do this writing project, and I was like, yes, this is awesome. But I did also have the example of watching my dad, her grandpa, who was a minister. So every week sat and wrote, something to say on Sunday, and then I got to see the finished product. So I could, had a pretty good grasp of, from beginning to end, how that process worked. And it was pretty cool.
I feel like that's different for everybody, but I think the way that I knew was having it physically in my hands. Because obviously since we have a publisher, we went through the process of sending in a query letter and then sending in the first bits of a manuscript, and some people don't do that. But when we finally had like the physical copies in my hand, I was like, this is real, this is actually happening, which is so cool.
A very cool feeling, definitely. That first email that I got back saying your book has been accepted, and I went flying up the stairs to tell my husband the good news, and I caught my toe on the top stair, hyperextended a hip muscle, and limped around for a week. And it was so exciting, I didn't even care. As far as writers are concerned, the bigs, obviously, King, and then I've read so much from working in libraries for so long, and a regular part of that is reading books and giving book talks and doing all of those things. So, fantasy stuff would cross my path, and mysteries, and more serious stuff, and it was always kind of like, how would I do this? How would I make this better? Everything I was reading, I was thinking, how would I approach something like this? And so just honestly, the act of reading is pretty inspirational. But then, of course, she got her first contract, and that inspired the heck out of me.
Yeah, I think I just feel like I'm influenced by everything. I don't try to limit myself to just writers, especially because like I'm in college, and so I don't like read for fun. Like I have no time. And so like I've seen so many movies and I watch so much TV, and so I feel like that almost inspires me more. And I feel like rather than being inspired by stories as a whole, I'm inspired by characters, because characters are who take the story to where it's going to go. They're the ones that lead everything. And so I'm really inspired by like types of people. I feel like it's pretty straightforward. I feel like
accessible.
It's accessible. I mean, I write YA, so it's teenagers, and so, but then it's also like how teenagers talk. Mm-hmm. And people maybe don't want to admit that teenagers talk a certain way, but they do. And so I've had my grandma say a couple times, there's a lot of colorful language in here. And I'm like, have you been down a high school hallway, recently? Because that's how kids talk. And sometimes I have to dial it down even, beyond what it actually would be. But I feel like it's real. It's how people talk.
Your stuff is very personal, and it's very visceral, and it's very, Stella, your main character in particular, is just, every time I read anything she says, it's just, she's a force of nature. And reading that is such a immediate and powerful and satisfying thing for a reader.
Yeah.
I've messed around with omniscient narrators, I've messed around with first person. I think that it depends on how you need to tell the story, how that story best works. I tried to do first person with We Could Be Heroes, and it just didn't happen right. It needed to be somebody that could really get into all of the nooks and crannies of all of the different characters and all of the thinking that's going on in that story. But the Zodiac Cusp Kids series, that's totally different. That's a very personal, this was my experience kind of a story. So that obviously has to come first person. I try to let the story dictate how the style comes out.
Yeah, how does the story need to be told?
Yeah.
Do it as much as you can. Yeah, write as much as possible. But also, because obviously I'm in college now, I'm taking workshop classes. And so that is all about putting out your work and then having other people read it and talk about what worked, what didn't work. And so find people that will, honestly, like find people that'll tear it up, because I've never gotten any person that has just been like, if I've given them a piece of writing and they've just been like, I love it, it's great, then that doesn't help me. And it's like, well, I want to change, I want to grow, I want to improve as a writer, and just being like, yeah, it's good, cool, like doesn't help. So I want people to tell me like, I hated this, this was stupid, or like, I loved this and here's why. I want that like really in-depth reaction to it. I find a lot of my ideas have come from like moments that have happened. So Mysterium was inspired by like a moment that I had on a plane with a like really rude stewardess, and that's like entirely how it came to be. How I started writing it was there's a scene where there's a rude stewardess. Or even like a short story that I'm writing now was just inspired by like just a song, and just little things like that. And I feel like even to not limit yourself with the media that you can be inspired by and that you can use, because like just everything, like, I don't know, a tree could inspire me, a color could inspire me.
Do you jump into your phone and do notes? Do you scribble down notes right away?
Sometimes. Yeah. I think if I'm worried that I'm gonna lose it, then yes, but most of the time it's like, oh, like I could fit that into Mysterium because that's the major thing right now. But like, if there's something that doesn't fit within that, then I'll keep it somewhere to be able to like come back to it, revisit it later.
I've read Nebraska authors. I read Nebraska authors from a young age, and I absolutely love Nebraska authors. Bess Streeter Aldrich, my mom handed that to me when I was a kid, and Cather, and I love the stuff. But every Nebraska author that I had read, up to a certain degree, it was like, this is not my experience. This is not how I feel about Nebraska. And
I also don't live on a farm.
and I don't live on a farm, and it's not the 1800s, and I'm not depressed, and all of these other things that, this is like, I live here too, so what's my connection to this story? And all of our stuff takes place at least partially in Lincoln.
Yeah.
And in the Midwest, and we touch on Kansas and Colorado and places that we've been. I personally am absolutely in love with the idea of place informing literature, and I am also in love with the idea that we don't live on the West Coast. We don't live in the South. We live here, and this is what we are informed by, and I want that to be an integral part of everything that I'm doing. Heroes, they zip around and do some different things, and there are scenes that take place in Kansas that are very applicable to Lawrence, very applicable to the parts of Kansas that I was in when I was in college. Some stuff that happens in the mountains in New Mexico that's absolutely critical to being in that place at that time. And I love it. I love bringing that to, I don't think we see nearly enough of that. Our little place is kind of limited sometimes in the expression of the literature that we get to read. So I've blogged about it, literature of place. It's always been one of my favorite things. And it's fun. It's fun to drive around town and be like, okay, we both got a couple of different scenes.
I always have Google Maps open if I'm looking for a specific place to know exactly where it is, and if I remember things from that area. I think it's also interesting coming from like a class perspective, like student class, like if somebody's writing something and it seems like a particular place and you ask like, oh, well, where is that? And they're like, well, it could be anywhere. And it's like, that seems less fun, because what makes the place special? What makes the place not just anywhere, and it could be Portland, it could be Nebraska, it could be California, it could be wherever, but it's like, what is special about that place? And I think we talk about what is more special about Nebraska other than like the railroads and, corn.
We've been talking about that a lot because that's one of the things that is a common thread between our things. And in some ways, for example, in the hero's world, I think it's kind of an idealized place where feminism is a given. The characters all have equal agency to, save the day or screw it up, whatever, regardless of gender. And I feel like that world is an expression of the feminism that I see. And we write strong characters. We write strong female characters who have zero problem doing any of the things that they do. They never feel like, because I'm a girl, this is unavailable to me or more difficult for me or anything like that. They just go and they do the thing.
Well, and it's interesting that you say that too, that they're strong, because it's like, I think of our characters as complex because they're all very different. Mm-hmm. The only thing that isn't holding them back is their gender. And so I think,
I like that.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because it's like, like Stella is like an idiot. Like, she messes up all the time. She does stupid things. She's crazy. And it's not because she's a woman. And I think it's interesting to also just see how like the different female characters would interact with one particular situation. Mm-hmm. Because they would all interact with it differently. It's just that they're never like, I can't do this because, they're never like that.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely the truth. I think mm-hmm. each one of our female characters is...
They're all so different.
So different, and a huge expression of different ways that women can be mm-hmm. and can express themselves and can live.
Yeah. I think it's funny that both of our first stories had that.
Yeah.
And I don't think I really realized that until now.
Yeah, we started talking about how much that dynamic between the mother and daughter characters in both of those series really drives the action. In Heroes, Kate and Olivia are kind of a team. Mm-hmm. They have been a team for a long time, and that's definitely reflective of how you and I grew up together.
Yes.
And then, Kate is looking at the idea that Olivia is about to branch off and become something new and different, and what is her role in that? So, that's kind of a typical examination of a daughter leaving the nest, mm-hmm. but it was definitely colored by our relationship.
Yeah.
Absolutely it was.
Yeah.
And then Stella and her mom.
It's very different because Stella had not lived with her mom full time, if even most of the time, up until the point where the book starts. And obviously the event that colors this whole story is that her dad dies, and she's been living with him this whole time. And there's all sorts of weird family dynamic of like, well, you don't even know who I am. You've never lived with me. You've never been with me. And then I all of a sudden have to live with you. It's like, but obviously teenagers are like, yeah, it's your mom. You kind of have to.
Serious crash course relationship.
Yeah,
there.
And then it is, the mom is also dealing with, I didn't want to make the mom like so one-dimensional too, that it's just like, whenever mom, that type of character. She is dealing with her own things too, even though you don't necessarily see that all the time. And it's like, well, first of all, you have this whole big family that you already have, and then you have these kids come in that have just dealt with this trauma, and you don't know how to deal with it either. And so what do? There's no right answer. There's no one way to do it. And you just try your best. I mean, it's real. I feel like a lot of people don't understand like how real diversity is. The characters that I have made are based off of people that racially are people that I knew, that I have known, so obviously there are going to be Black characters, obviously there are going to be Hispanic characters, obviously there are going to be Vietnamese characters because Lincoln specifically, but even just Nebraska in general has a huge Vietnamese population. And it just makes all white is boring. Like, I don't care. I've seen that movie. I've read that book. I don't care. And it's just, what's wrong with color? I don't understand what the problem, like, I'm not just making characters of color for the sake of making them of color. It's like, that's real. That's how people are. Real people's lives are like that.
You've definitely got a very realistic element running through all of the fantasy that goes into that. I think in Heroes, it's a little more stylized. I mean, and we're really pushing into, with book 2, which is not out yet, with the fact that part of your population has just become something that you had no idea that humans could be. And so forced diversity suddenly into this world, and everybody's going to freak out about it. They're not going to cope well. No. And that's going to be a big part of book 2.
White people have never. Do you have more than one female character that they talk to each other about more than just a love interest that is a man?
It's got to be two female characters.
Yeah.
With names.
Yes.
Who have a conversation in the book about something other than a dude.
And it could be literally anything that does not involve a man.
Anything at all. How is this not a thing? How can people not be having conversations?
I feel like it happens a lot more in movies and TV too, and that's almost worse, I think, because it's like sometimes you really can't find, like, books are so broad and wide and everything is possible to read, but with movies and books with movies and TV, it's in some ways a lot more limiting because there is only so much out there. I mean, there's a ton of stuff out there, but Hollywood still is a boys' game.
Movies that we absolutely freaking love. Star Wars.
Yeah.
Does not pass the Bechdel test.
No.
There are no conversations in that between two women about anything other than dudes.
Yeah.
If there are like what, 3 female characters in that actually have lines.
If you think about the cast of like most movies and TV shows, it's like there's one female character. I mean, Stranger Things,
which I have not watched.
Anything. It's like there's one female character, and that's specifically why I had a mostly female group of friends, is because I'm like, to me, that group of friends isn't real. Like, I've never seen a group of friends that's like 3 dudes and 1 girl. I've never seen that.
No.
I don't know where that came from.
No, it's always groups of girls.
Yeah, it's always groups of girls, and then always groups of dudes, and then sometimes both. Yeah. And there's like equal amounts of both.
The amount of conversation that goes on between groups of women is enormous.
Yeah.
Why that is not reflected is crazy.
No, it's insane.
Becoming the most authentic person that you can be, for me, that means writing. And for future plans, that means writing, whether or not, publication, whether or not any of the rest of it, because it's part of who I want to be as I get older. That's kind of the future of my writing, I think.
Yeah, I've never not written, so I don't know what I would do if I didn't.
Yeah. We'll just keep doing it.
Yeah.
We've talked about building a bookstore and
that would be cool.
Making a little brick and mortar place where we can hang out and have office space, and got all kinds of fun retirement plans that'll probably never pan out, but it's great to think about.
Well, welcome to the Jane Pope Geske Heritage Room of Nebraska Authors. My name's Diane Wilson, and I'm curator of our collection. The Heritage Room is a unique part of Lincoln City Libraries. We're funded by an endowment that is supported by the Nebraska Literary Heritage Association, and that was established through the Foundation for Lincoln City Libraries. So this endowment allows for the management of and public access to our collection. The NLHA continues to support the Heritage Room through membership, programming, and fundraising efforts, and I want to thank them for making events like this possible. An important function of the Heritage Room is to preserve and promote literature by and about Nebraska authors. And one way we do that is by providing the John H. Ames Reading Series as a forum for authors to share their books, which enables our community of readers to learn about the great literary talent that we have in our state. Today is actually the 218th event since our first program was held in 1985. The Ames Reading Series has included a wide variety of Nebraska authors and subjects. Today we're pleased to host the mother-daughter duo of Sarah Dale and Ellie Piersol. While they write individually, Sarah and Ellie support and inspire one another's creative process. Both explore themes of activism, empowerment, and feminism. Sarah is the author of 5 books of fantasy, magical realism, and horror. And currently she's in the midst of writing the 7-part series called Tales of the Zodiac Cusp Kids for young adults. Ellie wrote her first book when she was 17 years old and a student attending Lincoln Public Schools Arts and Humanities Focus Program. Today she studies creative writing at UNO and has recently published the 3rd book in her young adult Mysterium Excelsum series. So please join me in welcoming Sarah Dale and Ellie Piersol.
Okay, I'm the mama, so I get to go first. Once upon a time, my daughter Ellie and I quietly and happily filled up notebook after journal after back of electric bill envelope with character sketches and snippets of dialogue because it was fun. This was before Pinterest, of course. Then a friend of mine from college emailed and asked for my help editing his novel for publication with a new little startup independent publisher and encouraged us to submit our best stories if we could. Ellie rushed to complete the novel she'd been working on for 3 years since she was 13 and submitted it, and it was snatched up immediately. Inspired and challenged, I finished my first novel-length anything and crossed my fingers. Crash course in publishing contracts and cover art, a lot of late nights and editing struggles later, and here we stand. So far, we've written about goddesses and monsters, fairies and wolves, dogs and cats, battles, heroism, exciting escapes in helicopters, in custodial carts, and in unexpectedly magical leaps and bounds. Fear, confusion, hope, sadness, and love. And we've each written characters who are strong mothers and strong daughters, and who have plenty of agency over their own fates once they figure out how to be their own heroes. My first novel, We Could Be Heroes, is the story of some folks in a slightly altered version of Lincoln, Nebraska, who have to decide if they would take up the challenge of being called to join a unique army and fight to save their planet. I'm going to read a scene from We Could Be Heroes. And in this scene, Kate and her 4 dogs have just survived an attack by a demonic creature called a black dog at the dog park. Thanks to suddenly being in completely unexpected telepathic communication with all the dogs in her pack and a boost of supernatural power, which ends them all up alive but injured in Oak Lake and calling her daughter Olivia for a ride home. Kate's phone was in fact soaked. Luckily, some joggers came by and saw them, and after one look, they were proffering aid. Kate called and woke Liv, who was there within minutes. As soon as she pulled up, Kate realized that Jane was with her. Curious. Liv took one wide-eyed look at their bedraggled condition, slammed the van into park, flung open the door, and rushed to them. Olivia rarely moved slowly. That hadn't always been the case. As a little girl, she was much more the sit still and play computer games type of kid. It wasn't until somewhere in late middle school that she sort of caught fire. She started with organic food and jogging, and then it was running, and then weight training and judo and taekwondo, and Kate had stopped trying to keep up with her several years ago. Kate wasn't in bad shape, but she was never going to see 21 again either. Despite the fact that it was the crack of dawn and she'd been routed out of bed, Liv had not a hair out of place. That is to say, her jet black, quarter-inch long hair was gelled into a perfect shape. Not any sort of identifiable shape, but it was perfect. Her sleeveless black Ramones t-shirt showed off biceps Kate envied, and a few of her many tattoos peeked out here and there. Kate smiled to reassure her. Liv worried ferociously. She did everything ferociously, from loving to exercising to baking cookies. That's my girl, thought Kate. What happened? Are you all right? Are the dogs all right? Zell nuzzled Liv's arm, and she ran her hand down his side. When she encountered the first wound, her eyes darkened. What the hell, Mom? Talk. I'm going to hand off to you next to start talking about your Mysterium series, and I will let you talk a little bit about how that all goes together.
Okay. Well, I didn't prepare anything because I'm a professional. But Mysterium was born out of an unfortunate scene in an airport, or not an airport, excuse me, on an airplane. There was a rude stewardess, and so I knew in that exact moment that I had to write that down and turn it into a scene. And that made an entire novel, which was cool. And I was inspired by a lot of things, I think, but one very important thing was family. And Mysterium has quite a bit of family in it. There's a big, huge family in it. And it's also magic, obviously, because what else are you going to do? So Stella is put into this situation where she has to move from the home that she has known for most of her life to a different home, and that's with her mom after her father has died. And she's not happy about it. Who would be? And not only that, but she starts going to this school where all of these weird people are, and she doesn't understand what's going on, and then finds out that she has magic powers that nobody ever told her about. And that's kind of a stressful situation. I imagine that, you know, maybe not all Harry Potter and fun things are happening when you discover you have magic powers sometimes. And so what I will read for you is this scene where Stella first has this conversation with her mom about discovering her magic powers. Let me make some tea. I'll be just a second, she said, filling the kettle with water. What's up? She sat down across from me at the dining room table. Well, let's start with the basics. Why didn't you tell me about my magic powers? She stared at me for a moment, thinking. She didn't look shocked or surprised. She'd probably been thinking about this conversation all week. Your dad wanted to tell you sooner so he could prepare you for what was to come. But you went to public school and no one besides the two of us could prepare you guys for it, she began. Guys? Do Calvin and Eve have powers too? She nodded. And April, Jenna, Rachel, Jacob, and probably Chase. So that means you and Dad have powers? This was all news to me. Joseph as well. I sat and thought for a moment, thinking of everyone I had met since coming to Nebraska. All of the strange things that had been happening could be easily explained if everyone already knew. And everyone in Mysterium too? I asked. Yes, that's why they, like you, attend. Why did you never tell me? It got tricky because of the shared custody, and your father and I never agreed on when the right time would be. I could hear her picking at her nails under the table, her nervous tell. When the hell did you tell Eve then? She didn't go to Mysterium. Her powers never gave her or anyone else any issues like you've had. She started questioning it when she moved out of the house. She ended up figuring it out on her during her freshman year of college. Her roommate had gone to Mysterium and helped her learn what she needed to know. You didn't even tell Eve? What the hell? She had already moved before it became an issue, and she didn't ask for our help. With you and Calvin, it was just never the right time. When would have been the right time? After Dad died? Before I started at a school for magic kids? I protested. Do you think I planned on everything that's happened in the last 3 months? There was sadness and regret in her voice, but she was trying to be strong. Okay, let's take a look at what's happened because you never told me. The first day of school, I kicked a ball through the window, and just today I got shot at. And let's not forget to mention the fight with Rachel. You got shot? Why didn't you tell me this first? What happened? I felt like we needed to start at the beginning. I wanted to protect you. You never would have understood. Never understood. You hardly ever spoke to me, I shouted. That's exactly why I could never tell you. It was never the right time. You could have told me during break before I even went to school. You never wanted to talk. We went silent for a long time, and I felt that it was needed after the yelling. I sat back in my chair with my arms crossed, looking down at my lap. I could feel my nose flaring, and for good reason. Tell me about the shooting, she said, cutting off the silence. And so, I mean, that's a big thing with us, is the relationship between mother and daughter, whether it be good or otherwise. Stella obviously has a really specific situation, whereas, you know, coming from the daughter, then relating to the mom, but then also, you know, having the mom's perspective is, I think, really an interesting thing, especially like, you know, one that's leaving the nest for you.
Yes, and I was just thinking about another scene that's in Heroes where they've been given the opportunity, or at least given the knowledge, that there is a group of people who have been called to be a part of this army to save the planet. But they have free will. They don't have to join. And for a lot of the book, they haven't actually been officially asked yet. So they're just kind of deciding, what if we do get asked? What are we going to say? And they work it out together. It's the two of them that have to make that decision, and they do make it together. Kate was still lying awake when Liv got home. "Jeff fun?" she asked when Liv tiptoed past her door. "Yeah," Liv paused, and then came in and perched on the edge of the bed. "You?" Kate sighed and smiled. "Yes. I mean, of course, yes, but you know, I'm overthinking the heck out of it as usual." "What are you thinking?" Liv asked. "I'm wondering how much we're being manipulated, if at all. We went from knowing absolutely nothing about the existence of other creatures who surround us, 3 days ago? To suddenly having them turn up all over the place. And now there's this thing with Tony. It seems, on the one hand, like the goddesses are making sure that we have a full view of exactly what's going on, making sure that it's important to us, you know, with Narissa and Clay and Kobe, and of course with Jane being targeted. But then here we sit in limbo. I mean, what's the deal? What's the holdup? Are we going to be called or not? And after that, then what? What happens to us then? We know all this information. Are we some sort of hangers-on? Do we get hit with some sort of Men in Black memory wipe? I'm just frustrated, I guess, worrying. You know me. Yeah, I'm kind of frustrated too. But Mom? Yeah? What would you say if they asked? Have you decided that? Like, we have free will, right? We could say yes or no. She paused. What do you want to do? She gazed at Kate with eyes aglow with energy. Babe, Kate took a deep breath. You know what I want to know? What? I want to know what your gut tells you. One thing I've learned from living with you since you were born is that you have extremely good instincts. What are they telling you right now? Liv's eyes gleamed in the low light. No question about it for me. If I'm asked, I'm in. She smiled. My gut says this is good. This is right. My gut says we could be heroes. And who in their right mind would say no to that? Kate smiled at her daughter, her strong, stand-up, good-hearted daughter. As always, baby girl, she said, holding her tight. You inspire me. What else did you think about as far as Mysterium was concerned?
I took something else actually from iOS,
Okay.
which most of my second novel takes place away from home completely, and without parents. They're completely on their own. They're left to their own devices to literally survive in a completely volatile situation. And then once we end, we're in the hospital, as you know, as after action scenes.
Where all good stories
Yes.
end up, in the hospital.
And Stella is in, I don't want to say a coma because I know that's not medically correct, but she's out. And she overhears something. Will she wake up? Somebody said, I couldn't see anything. My eyes felt like lead and refused to open. I could only listen to whoever was talking. We don't know. She's got a lot of things in her system right now. She has, however, rehydrated without much trouble, a second voice said. She's conscious but unresponsive. What about the others? Are they okay? The first person said. They're doing fine, all in stable condition. Have you been in contact with their parents? I didn't recognize the voice, but it sounded like it could be male. Yes, we've hardly been able to leave since we heard. Can I stay with her? The first person asked. They sound familiar. The voice was very clearly feminine. She sounded like she had been crying. Yes, I'll leave you with her, the second said. I heard them exit as the woman stayed. I heard her move closer to me and sit down, probably in a seat next to me. She sighed heavily and made a noise that sounded like she was running her hands through her hair. She inhaled shakily. Stella, what am I going to do with you? She asked. I couldn't respond, even though I wanted to. What would your father be doing about this? She laughed sadly. If there's one thing I've learned about you, it's that you're so selfless. You'd give your life to save anyone you care about except yourself. She sat in silence for what felt like a long time before taking my hand in hers. She kissed me on the forehead, released my hand, and stood to leave the room. I heard her stop, probably in the doorway, before she spoke again. I love you, baby girl. Hold on tight. You're so strong. You can make it. You can do it. Then she left. That's when I realized who the voice belonged to. My mother.
We've talked a lot about how our relationship has impacted what we've written, and I do think it's important. I think the way that we approach communicating with each other and communicating through problems is definitely something that gets played out in a lot of our stuff, and also just having the support of family, of teachers, of mentors, of PAC, of having everybody there and everybody rooting for you. And that's kind of, it's a theme that goes through all of our stuff in terms of how to best empower our characters to make them do the changes and make them be the heroes that they need to be. Mm-hmm. I got a couple more books here. The series that I'm working on right now is a series of young adult novellas. They're little short guys. My idea for this was that not everybody has time every day to sit down and read 300 pages worth of fiction, but you've got 20 minutes on your lunch hour, so maybe this is a good choice. These stories started out as a request for a short story in an anthology about 80s horror movies. So that's where I started with this. And then I wrote the first one, and it was entirely too long to be a short story, so I had to do something entirely different with it. But they do take place in the 80s. And these are the tales of three kids who are best friends. And I will give you a little bit of that. There are also some really interesting moms in these stories and some really interesting not moms that help the kids get through what they need to get through. So it's that kind of extended PAC thing. This is from Something Wicked, which is the first of the Tales of the Zodiac Cusp kids. I couldn't remember a time before Jenny, David, and I were best friends. I know David's mom didn't move here until halfway through our kindergarten year, but I don't remember that part of it. He was always just there, with Jenny and me running around at recess, walking home from school, spending summers at the swimming pool, the three of us. David had some guy friends too, including Jen's twin brother John, but they weren't best friends the way the three of us were. We never thought it was weird that David's best friends were two girls, and back then I don't remember anybody else getting too bent out of shape about it either. I think most of his guy friends were a little jealous. None of them could get girls to give them the time of day usually. Both David and Jenny lived with their moms. Their dads weren't really in the picture much. Jenny's dad would show up occasionally, mostly during the summer, and maybe stay a few days. Sometimes he'd take us all out for burgers or bring home a bucket of chicken, and we'd all eat at the picnic table in Jen's backyard. Her dad always got enough for everybody, including David and me, plus Jen's twin brother John and his friends. But David's dad never came around, and David never talked about him. Back then, I was the out of the ordinary one. I think I was one of 2 or 3 kids on our whole street whose parents weren't divorced. I sure don't remember Jenny's mom ever bringing boyfriends around. I think she went on dates sometimes. I know there were times Jen would spend the night because her mom was going to the movies, but there wasn't ever anybody serious. David's mom was different. There was a string of boyfriends for his mom. None of them hung around long. Often I didn't even know a name, just a car. There was Green Chevelle guy and El Camino guy and crappy gold duster guy. There was even a motorcycle guy or two, but no names. Nobody memorable anyway, until Mitch. Mitch showed up at the beginning of 6th grade, and he stuck around. It wasn't too long after he showed up that things started to change. Jenny's house was normally the hangout house. My folks didn't allow my sister and me to have more than one friend each come over after school. They both worked, so we were on our own till they got home. We never hung out at David's. Jen's mom didn't care if we came to their house as long as we didn't mess stuff up too bad. She kept a huge stockpile of cheap store-brand pop in the basement fridge, and we were allowed to make as much popcorn as we could eat in the air popper. It was the fall of 1982 when we started 6th grade. Some people had microwaves. Jen's mom had considered it, but opted instead for paying extra to get MTV. We all worshipped her for her wisdom in this. So there are smart moms, really, really smart moms in all of these stories. Something Wicked follows the kids after a movie marathon that they stay up all night watching horror movies and then take off first thing in the morning to do Jen's paper route. And along the way, they run into a creature who is horrifying and appears to be mostly dead and who's chasing them down, and they are suddenly on the run for their lives. And they are on the run for their lives through Northeast Lincoln. And they end up at a swimming pool in what we've called Hamilton Park, because it's kind of a combination between Uni Park and some stuff from Woods. But they end up there, and they have to do a last stand against the bad guy and save the day. And there's a bunch of sixth graders doing this. At the end of this story, their mentor, who in addition to Jen's mom, who knows a little bit of witchcraft, they also are lucky enough to hook up with a mentor, a guy named Mr. Rako, who's a Vietnam vet, who kind of knows what's going on and is able to direct them in the right way. There are also dogs in these stories. There are dogs in all of the stories.
Yes,
And cats.
and they talk in mine.
Yes. Yep, they talk in this one too.
Yes.
So if you're digging that, they're just awesome in these books. Something Haunted is the second story in the Zodiac Cusp Kids Tale. This one came out last year. And this one is all about Starkweather and the ghost of Starkweather, who shows back up in Lincoln and is ready to create a lot of problems. He shows up, interestingly enough, on the tail of a tiny little tornado, which buzzes through town, and that's fun. He goes right by the Tasty Inn and up through the park there, and a rampage through Northeast Lincoln. While that is happening, and Jenny and David and Angie are in the basement at Jenny's house with Jen's mom, they're watching the news at one end of the basement, and at the other end of the basement, the card table sets with the Ouija board that Angie has brought with her to spend the night. And all of a sudden, the Ouija board was moving. Not just a little bit either. The thing was dancing around, shaking itself free of the box. It was still partially inside. The planchette had already juked its way out onto the table, and it was zooming around. What the? I began. Jen's mom put a hand on my shoulder. Shh, Angie girl, let's watch and see. Jen's long fingers reached out. I could see what she was aiming for. The board was caught up and trying to free itself from the last corner of the box. Her mom reached out and calmly but firmly grasped Jenny's hand in her own. Don't touch, love, watch. What's it doing? David whispered. We all jumped a little as the board gave one final flop and freed itself from the cardboard box. The planchette did a happy little spin and jumped onto the board. We waited breathlessly. Are we supposed to? I began. Jen's mom, her fingers tightened on my shoulder. And then the planchette took off. I pulled the notebook and pen out of my pocket where I always kept it. Yes, I know. I was a giant nerd back then. Still am. You're just going to have to deal. Watch close, Jen's mom whispered, leaning over my shoulder. She needn't have worried. Everyone's eyes were glued to the spectacle of the planchette breakdancing all over the board. And then suddenly it got serious. It paused and then zoomed to the W. I scribbled it down. H-E-R-E. Where? Where what? David asked, staring at the planchette. It had paused, still vibrating madly, but at the sound of his voice, it continued. W-H-O-I-S-T-H-E-R. We stared at one another. Jen's eyes were as wide as saucers. David looked puzzled, but I noticed his body language, too. He seemed poised for a fight. I'm sure I was white as a sheet. Jen's mom remained calm. As I took a breath to speak, her hand clenched on my shoulder tightly. Do not use anyone's name, she hissed at us. I nodded sharply. I knew what she meant. I'd been doing a lot of reading over the summer, everything I could get my hands on about ghosts and demons, magic, and the supernatural. A lot of it was crap. But some things were consistent, at least, and names were one. Names had power. It was vital that you guard your name around supernatural creatures. If they had your name, it gave them the advantage, and it put you at risk. I chose my next words with great care. We hear you. We are listening. So, little mom wisdom.
Yes.
And they hit with a little mom wisdom at the end of book 3, too, do they not?
Yes.
That
well,
starts to happen.
Yeah. I don't, unfortunately, have it with me because I thought I would just talk about it. But, so book 3 is very politically driven for me. And at the very end, there are speeches and, all sorts of things that everybody wishes they could do if something great big fun happens like that. But the mom is the one that, because Stella is off being reckless and stupid as she is and is wont to be, mom comes in and finishes out the work and is the one to say, oh, I came in and I figured out everything and here's what it is and I made all the choices here and I figured it out, so here you go. And then there is this whole event at school where and this sort of gets into the activism sort of stuff, is that who has the power and who is sort of willing to admit when they are wrong. Because I think some people, if they're in a power position, they're not often ready to admit that they did something wrong. It's hard, and sometimes it's vulnerable and it's weakness. And so this is the scene where at the very end, the principal, who has been basically complicit in all of this, allowing all of this to happen, is admitting what he has unfortunately done. Mysterium Excelsium, we have come to the end of another year, he began. Everyone in the room cheered, and it has been an interesting one, to say the least. He took a moment and paused, looking around the entire gym until he landed on us. I would actually like for a particular group of students to come down for a chance to speak. Stella Otium and friends, would you mind coming down here? He asked. We looked at each other as we got another roar of applause and cheers from the other students. We walked down the bleacher stairs and stood in the center of the gym with the principal. So you all have really forced me to start thinking not only how to provide an education for a different group of people, but also how to be a better human than before. For all my life as a black man, I have encountered many wrongs in elementary school through college. Believe it or not, I was actually an activist. I fought for what I thought was right in my local communities and schools, but I lost a lot of that power when I entered the school system. As a teacher, I learned how hard it was to try to make your voice heard and teach what I really believed in. And because of that, I became jaded and even complicit in a lot of ways. And I'd like to admit that this year I was complicit, some ways intentional and other ways unintentional. I knew that there were a lot of things going wrong, but I could not speak my voice. And to an extent, I relied too heavily on our local civil unrest students to do that work for me. I didn't protect you or help you when you needed it most, and I failed the rest of the students by ignoring your pleas for help. And for that, I am sorry. My eyes widened to the size of dinner plates. We have such similarities in writing, wow. As I looked at Principal Jameson, my friends, and the rest of the student body. Next year, and for all years to come, I have decided to be stronger for you, to be better for all of my students, and to be better for my teachers. I will not allow that same hatred and intolerance into Mysterium Excelsium ever again. Everyone cheered so loud the noise echoed off the walls. And as an example of that, even though it might seem counterintuitive, I did invite the group of students that were terrorizing the school back for another year. Only under a few stipulations: that they all receive therapy and are required to attend a public school, women's groups, help at homeless shelters, take a Black Studies class, and learn about the dangers of conversion therapy. I required them to learn about the real world. Would you like to know the decision they came to? He asked. Everyone shouted a resounding yes at him. They declined my offer. The cheers in the room were deafening. And then there's a final moment where he hands it off to the students and is like, would you like to say anything? He's giving them the voices that they've always needed. And Stella says, this mic does not belong to me, it belongs to them. I took the mic and held it out to the rest of my friends. They looked at me like I was crazy, all except Alpha, who took the mic from my hand. I just want to say that the behavior of the Jesus cult, which is what they're called, was learned. They were not born believing in those things. They were taught their entire lives that they're better than everyone else. They were convinced from a young age that they had magic powers and they were better for it, but that wasn't true. They didn't even have magical abilities like the rest of us, but they still held other kinds of powers because they were straight, white, middle-class people. I know that there are a lot of people in this room right now that feel like your voices don't matter because of your skin or who you love or your religion. I don't want anyone to ever feel that way. You all matter, every single one of you. But many of you have privileges that others don't. If you all come away with anything from this experience, it should be that every single person in this world matters, and no one is ever lesser than the other. Check your privilege, listen to your neighbors and your friends, and believe in your voice. Dolpha dropped the mic as we walked out of the gym with every single person in the gym screaming behind us. And that's a really important moment because Dolpha is a young, queer, black woman, and Stella is white. And so it was very important for me as a writer to literally and metaphorically hand that mic to somebody else, because it as much as everybody is fighting to have their voice heard, some people need that boost a little bit more than others.
I think that's another thing that really you can see a lot through both of our works, is that the characters are all struggling with their personal demons, their personal battles, their personal color, situation, place in the world, history, all of those things. And the thing that brings it all together is that they have got to take their own power. Mm-hmm. They have to do it in order to save the day, in order to get to the next day, in order to do whatever it is that they need to accomplish. The characters have got to have their own power and know it and be it. In the Zodiac Cusp kids, of the three kids, the one that's sort of traditionally the weakest, or maybe, would be the weakest link is Angie, because she's little and she wears big glasses and she plays obscure orchestra instruments and she doesn't,
she
run
doesn't want to
fast
march
or do any of those things. But she's the one that has to learn that she can be brave. Even somebody like her can be brave. And I think it's interesting with Something Haunted, how many different people's stories she has to learn in order to figure out how to take down the ghost of Charlie Starkweather, because he hurt so many people, because there were so many people involved in that whole situation. She really has to ramp up the empathy and figure that out, how to make all of that power and all of that anger and sadness convert into something that she can use to put the ghost down. And she does it by touching base with all of the victims. And I'm not going to read about all of the victims out loud, but it's interesting history and it's interesting Lincoln history. So I highly recommend reading about these people. This is after she goes through the list of all of the people that he wronged until we get to his final victim, Merle Collison. Merle Collison was killed in his sleep, just so they could steal his car. This man was a soldier, a paratrooper in World War II. He fought and survived freaking Hitler's army and then came home to be killed in his sleep by a boy who was too dumb and too bored to be bothered to fight down the evil in his own soul. A boy whose entire legacy is one of horror and sadness and loss. And now, here that boy was trying to make a comeback. Wasn't it enough? The evil that he'd already loosed on this town? Now he wanted to come back and start up again? Not on our watch. He wanted Carol, and he'd locked his sights on me. Well, okay, Charlie, here's your chance to dance. I'm all dressed up and ready for you, you monster. I'm willing to bet that your badass 1950s self isn't going to know what to do with a badass 1980s girl. So finding your own power, being your own hero, that's a lot of the stuff that we go back and forth about.
Mm-hmm. What I particularly like about that piece, though, is that it's empathetic, but it's looking at somebody's history, and it's not an excuse, it's an explanation mm-hmm. for why somebody has done something like that. And I think that it's almost, that perspective is so interesting because it's actually trying to look at this person and look at this problem. Because I feel like if you look at something like that in such a black and white way, you're not going to get anywhere. Mm-hmm. But if you look at it like that, with empathy and with care and with attention to detail, then, mm-hmm. she's going to know what to do the next time somebody like that comes around.
Absolutely.
Because she's experienced that.
Absolutely.
Because she sees the gray area.
And we've talked about this too a little bit, that I think that this is an exploration of what power looks like, what independence looks like, what heroism looks like from a female perspective. And that's not something we see enough of. We don't see enough of it in Lincoln, Nebraska, in books, and we don't see enough of it in girls. And so I think that's something that both of us really are interested in putting out there into the universe, that this is what female power looks like.
And it's very different. Our female heroes are all very different. They're wildly different. You know, Stella is the type of character that if you look at somebody and you say, oh, that person's so stupid, that person's so annoying, like, I would love to say something to them, but I would never. She's the one that actually goes and says, you're an idiot and I don't like you. You know, and Angie is book smart, and you know, there's so many different, and all of the other female characters in Mysterium they have different talents and they have different aspects of their personalities that help them in different ways, that only they can do because that's who they are.
So many different expressions of how power can be and how it can look.
Because it's not just Katniss Everdeen, strong female character, you know, it's more multifaceted than that.
It's lots of things, so many things. This is what we have prepared to read, and we would be happy to take any questions if you guys have any questions about the stories or about the characters or about any of the stuff that we've talked about. We would be glad to take them from you. And the crickets chirp.
No one came with their notes.
Yay. Yes.
When did you get the inspiration to start writing? Did it come like in grade school or junior high or high school? Or was it always there early?
I always loved to tell stories in some way. Like when I was a kid, I loved watching movies and TV, and I wasn't a big reader until like middle school at least. But I also like loved to play with dolls, and like you would create obviously the stories with your friends and whatever. And I remember distinctly, like in 4th grade was when I first started like writing down a story. It was about an alien that came to Earth and was experiencing life that way, and that was in 4th grade. And I remember like that was the first time I ever started writing down a story, and it was just kind of like, you know, I kind of always felt like, well, some people draw and other people do sports and other people do this, and I write. So
yeah,
it was kind of always there,
in
some way or another.
How has your writing impacted the way that you read, either recreationally or whatever? How has being an author changed that?
I don't know if it's just that, we're authors, but also that, like, I don't know, I feel very judgmental. Well, and especially, like, being in, like fiction writing classes, like, I feel like every time I read something, like, sometimes in my head, I'm like, oh, well, I'm reading a novel, so, like, obviously there are no problems with it because it's already a novel. And it's like, well, what if you read it from a writer's workshop perspective? Then you can pick out all the little, like, that's weird, why are they doing that? And, like, well, that's stupid, like, what the heck? You know, it's really different, and it's really fun to, like, do that to Shakespeare, like, because it's like, looking at all the literary canon is like, they're not that great. We're just given this idea that because it's in print, it must be perfect and it must be great. And I feel like writing so much and reading other people's stuff has given me that, to be able to be like, this isn't, it's different.
The bar gets set so much differently. I mean, the ability to suspend disbelief when you're reading, to walk into a novel and just be like absorbed by it, the number of like literally sentences it takes before I can shut off editor brain and just be in the story, for me is huge. And if I get really past the first chapter and I haven't been able to shut off editor brain, it's just not going to happen. So at some point it's got to sweep me away, and that is not only awesome, but then I go back and look at it again like, how can I do that? How can I sweep somebody else away? Yeah.
What's the best book for both of you that you have ever read?
I know there's a sci-fi series by Elizabeth Hayden, and the first book is called Rhapsody. And that, for me, was, as far as the absorption into the story moment, that one just grabbed me immediately. It's somewhat lyrical and musical, and also very straightforward and action oriented. And for me, that was just the perfect combination to draw me in. Love that series. Absolutely love this. And as I recall, I was rereading that series on the airplane when you had that experience with the flight attendant.
That's funny.
That is funny.
Because then I came back crying, and you're like, what's going on?
that was an ugly day.
Yeah. I feel like I always go back. I feel like, honestly, like the Grimm's fairy tales, I just love them. I have the real, actual gritty versions of them, and it's so, like, it's crazy. But I just, there's just enough to seem fantasy, but also like, I don't know, this could be, like, somebody could have thought this was real. But also, and it's just vague and subtle enough that you can insert your own ideas into it, and obviously that's why so many people have rewritten it so many times in different formats, and they're just like interesting to me because it's fantasy, but it's also like this very well could have been real for somebody.
Yeah, that kind of vibe of magical realism too, which I haven't really, I want to be better at that.
It's like creative nonfiction. It's like I don't quite know how to get there.
Yeah. There's a short story by Gabriel Garcia Marquez called Very Old Man with Enormous Wings, and that one always just, I was like, this is genius. This is so awesome. I want to be able to touch readers in the same way that this story touches people. But yeah, magical realism, I think, is something that, we both kind of play around with, where you're just walking along the street and all of a sudden, hey, that's not supposed to be there. But that's the fun of it. I love writing fantasy for that reason. That's what
it's so much more fun than anything else.
I agree.
It's better.
So how disciplined are both of you as writers, along with balancing the rest of your life, like being a student, I'm assuming, and having family and other jobs? And do you also, do you find any support in from different writers or writers groups? Obviously the two of you, I'm guessing, work together in a lot of ways, but do you have other people, other writers that you...
I mean, because it's nice to be in that class format, because then, like, you're required to give other people your stuff. And sometimes people will totally rip it apart, and then sometimes people will be like, actually, I really enjoyed this, and I thought this was really cool. And that's helpful. I have found a couple friends that if I've been like, hey, I want your opinion on this, and they'll actually give me more than just like, that was good, which is... Yeah. I don't want this is good, because it's like, obviously it's not if I'm giving it to somebody else to read. But even like, I'm not disciplined at all. Like, I specifically was like, I need to graduate and I need to be done for a minute, because then I'll be graduated and then I can just write, and that's all I'll do, because I'm barely a full-time student and it's still hard. Like, it's just the amount of writing that I want to be able to do and the attention that I want to give it, I don't have the time to do, which is really hard.
It's hard to balance that with school, and you've always been sort of, deadline driven in the sense that you like watching them fly by.
And ignoring them? Yeah. Yep.
But I think we're super lucky to have each other, as far as, having that to bounce each other ideas off of, and go through scenes and walk through all of that and say, where am I going with this and what do you see from this? And we're also lucky online, I think, to have kind of a community of people who are willing to, read little bits and say, I really like this, and I think this character is whack because this is happening. Okay, yeah, that's where we're going here.
Yeah, it's also kind of interesting to have, if you have family or friends that like aren't writers necessarily, because then they are reading it from a reader's perspective. But then they will, like, one of my best friends, Jamie, knows a lot about, like, what cabins look like.
Yeah.
And so she was giving me a lot of details. She was like, I want to see, like, a fire-burning stove over here and, like, a bed with piles of mattresses over here, and, like, I want to see, like, weird little wind chimes over here, like, in a scene where there was a cabin. And I thought that was really interesting, because it's like, I would have not ever thought about that, and I would also not know what to just put in the cabin in the middle of the woods.
Yeah, I have absolutely no problem asking people for their input on stuff like that. I mean, obviously, I've had a huge amount of input from family members, My husband is a veteran, and so a lot of the information that I have about Army and battles and strategery and all of that stuff comes from being able to talk to him. Which is entirely different from processing writing.
Right.
You know, those two things are very different. And I do think we're super I know one thing we've always done is like, I'll trap you in the car and we'll like drive around and I'm like, okay, we have to go through this scene because it's just not working. And,
Right.
And
it
then,
doesn't make sense.
Yeah. We've driven around for half an hour and you've gotten
Or like
all the Pokemon
from Lincoln
Go
to
and,
Omaha. Yeah.
That's definitely workshop time going on here.
Yeah.
But discipline is hard.
It's hard.
It's hard. It is hard. I made the deadlines on the Zodiac Cusp Kids. They're 6 months apart. They're coming out, and that was sort of an enforced deadline project. Like, I know I can do this, and if I don't have these deadlines, I will not do it. Therefore, forcing myself into this situation. Because yeah, that is hard. And then when you think you're done, you're not done. Because there's a whole other process that goes along with editing and formatting and cover art and oh heavens to Betsy, it's a whole big thing.
Yeah.
Might talk a little bit about your artists that have done your.
Oh gosh, yeah.
So my cousin Roxy has done, and we don't have copies. They're over there. Has done all 3 of my covers, and I also had stickers made by my friend Jamie, who I mentioned previously. And it's kind of nice because I went to arts and humanities for high school, and that is a really great place to, like, if you want a very talented artist, and there's some amazingly talented artists coming out of arts and humanities, but also that'll do something for cheap because they're students, then go there because then it's the perfect harmony because then it's also, I love to be able to pay a local small artist and then be like, here everybody, here it is, here's this person.
Here's this person. Yeah, the cover for We Could Be Heroes was done by niece on the other side of the family. Pierce created that for me, and the sketches for book 2, which I really need to finish. See, that book 2 in the Heroes series does not have a deadline, which is problematic.
But it needs a self-imposed deadline.
Well, I've blown past a few of those too. But there are dragons on the cover of book 2, and her dragons are so cool. She's such an amazing artist.
And then Wicked and Haunted were sort of a mishmash of computer systems, and because didn't I do part of Wicked a little bit?
And we wanted to do, one of the things that I really wanted to do was have kind of local photography as a piece of the cover art. And so what we've got is a bulletin board that as the stories progress, different pictures get stuck on there. The first one was a picture of a kid in, and I don't even know what you call those things. It's that barrel that used to be on playgrounds that it's wooden and you get in it and you run and it's terrifying and a horrible toy and people I'm sure had concussions.
I don't think they exist
Oh
anymore.
no, they're never around anymore. But I did find a woman on Facebook who had a picture taken of herself in 1984, I think, inside the one at Woods Park. And she allowed me to use that for the cover of the first book. And then the second one has some pictures that I took of Charlie's grave when we went to visit at oh boy, that's a whole set of stories right there. Grass everywhere, except right around Charlie's grave where everything's dead. Kind of creepy. And book 3, which comes out in May, and that one's called Something Lost, has to do with Whitehall. Which is over in the northeast part of town, and the artwork on that is going to include some photos that I took of Whitehall Mansion, which is a beautiful building, and if you get a chance to go poke around in there, and they have tours and things that happen every once in a while. Great stuff. Also creepy pictures, which that's a whole nother thing, but fun stuff. And I've tried to make that an element of all of the covers for Something Haunted.
And I also don't know that would happen if we were with a bigger publisher.
Yeah.
I really don't think that it would. And in some ways, maybe the quality could be sacrificed or whatever you might want to say. Because these definitely don't look like any other book that are mass produced by giant publishers. But it's also like, but we get what we want on it. And it's directly from, like, it's Charlie's grave. It is these photos. Like, it's not, because otherwise it would be something way different.
Yeah, we've talked about that too. Working with an independent publisher is a really interesting situation because we are offered just a huge amount of freedom as far as what we can do and what we can create. There's nobody coming in saying, I want you to write something that looks like this or that reads like the Hunger Games, or the,
it's like, well, that's already been done, so of course it's
why
not
would
gonna
you
work.
want to do that? But that happens a lot, and that's kind of unfortunate, I think. And one of the benefits for working with independent publishers are they're like, yes, go do your thing, be independent, be awesome. It's fabulous. So Burning Willow Press has done a lot for us. Has really helped us out a lot. Yeah.
Ellie, you're getting up at 4 o'clock every morning to go to work at Channel 7.
Yes.
Any raw material in the TV world that you might be holding on to and seeing possibilities with?
Well, it's funny because TV is sort of like behind the scenes, like nobody understands, like nobody really knows what goes on behind TV except people that are in TV. And so it's interesting to like, you know, people don't really know that like the verbal abuse that you go through daily, like, you know, or like that you throw at other people because it's okay. But I actually wrote a short story for a class that took place in an audio booth that was specifically like about somebody getting yelled at and then one person defending the other person, and it's a relationship. But I think that could end up being something, probably not, at least with Mysterium, just because I don't know how well it would actually fit. But I think, you know, I feel like even after not even working at KTV for 2 years that I have so much, because you think like, you know, I think people think in like politics or in something that they don't entirely understand, or TV or whatever, that everybody is like actually very poised and intelligent and like knows what they're doing, but everybody are just like catty little girls in an office, and they're all like talking behind each other's backs and then never telling anybody and they're like, oh my God, I hate her. Like, oh my gosh, I love your skirt. Like, it's like totally, it's exactly like that. You would never really know that until you get into a newsroom or until you get into probably the White House floor, you know, but it's so funny because it's also like, the thing about TV is also like it's mostly adult men that are behind the scenes and they're acting like 13-year-old girls, which is so funny.
I think too, talking about raw material and talking about ideas for stories, I mean, you and I are both in the middle currently of a 7-book series.
Yeah.
Which is a lot. But it certainly does not keep you from cooking up ideas about what you want to do when it's done.
Yeah.
And in truth,
or what you could insert.
Or how you could change that. And honestly, the best way, as far as deadlines are concerned, the best way to get me to complete task A is to hand me task B. Because then I don't want to do that, and I want to go back and do the other thing. Yeah. You know, so I
don't want to do biology homework. Yeah, I want to write my third book.
I want to write my third book. Yeah. But there's always something. There's always something that's sparking it and making it go and making you excited about writing. And that's so yay.
Yeah. Well, and that's also the nice thing is like people sometimes think like, oh, well, how much are your stories related to your own personal experience, or like did you have to do research for this, or like blah blah blah, and it's like, but there's so much that goes on during a life that it's like everything is
fair game.
Everything that I have ever done and learned in my entire life is probably going to end up novelized in some shape or form, just because that's the material that you get, you know, use it.
And even the research that we do, you know, becomes part and parcel of all of that. So there's always something. It's always good stuff.
Ellie, do you anticipate that Stella will progress as you get older?
Absolutely.
Obviously, she's into her, second year?
Yeah. Well, yes, she's going to go through a lot of things. I think it's kind of funny because I was thinking about this, I think a while ago, that like she's never really caught a break. Like she's always suffering. But I think that, yeah, it's like she will not only, because I think the biggest thing that I've noticed is the way that she's progressed is how my writing has progressed. Like reading book 1 to me, and this is not to be like, don't read it because you should, but like it makes me cringe so much because I wrote it when I was 15. And obviously I love that I was able to have that opportunity to publish and have that experience, but it's like I just want to rewrite it. But she's definitely going to change. She that's one thing that I hate about certain characters is that if they just stay the same and they don't ever learn anything and they don't ever change and they just continue. Like, I'm rewatching Gossip Girl right now, and I'm sure most of you don't know what that is, and that's okay. But it's this absolute garbage television show where there are these characters and they make the exact same mistakes every single season, and it's like for 7 seasons. And it's so stupid, and it's like, why do people like these people? Grow. Yeah, they're so stupid, and it's like, I would hate to read that. Like, I enjoy this, so I don't want other people to be like, I hate these people.
No, they gotta grow.
They gotta figure it out.
Grow, little frontal lobes, grow.
Yeah.
Well, any other questions? There's a lot of things that people want to know about your writing. So. Sarah and Ellie, thank you so much for coming today.
Yeah.
And, on behalf of the Heritage Room, we just have a couple little
Thank you.
mementos.
Thank you so much.
They're so cute.
What, I know, aren't they? All the little stickers.
They're
and
sticky
everything.
notes.
You can use.
So cute.
You can use that in your writing.
Yes, yes. To actually mark the books instead of copy and paste them. Print them out.
So thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for coming. Thank you very much.